All right. Thanks for joining us today, Nick.
You bet, guys.
All right. So I want to really ask you first and foremost, where did you get started in like this entrepreneur space? Because you've built out a lot of stuff with the Side Hustle Nation and the Side Hustle Show, but like, where was your like beginnings in this entrepreneurial journey of yours?
And the origin story. I feel like I was really fortunate to have been bit by the entrepreneurial bug pretty young. For me, it was a house painting internship in college, freshman year of college at University of Washington, where this woman who became my manager, she stands up in front of my like intro to statistics class and she's like, "Do you want a summer internship where you learn entrepreneurship and sales and marketing and customer service?" And it's like, dude, that sounds like a fantastic summer internship. Oh, and by the way, the average earnings are like $7,000, which for college kids like triple my net worth or something at the time. It's like, dude, this is where do I sign up? They don't tell you until like you're pretty deep down the interview process that it's going to be painting houses. And so by that time, you're kind of like bought in a little bit. Um, and that was it for me. It was taking the leap for that. And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was like, because I was worried, like, is this a pyramid scheme? Like, what's the catch here? It sounds really cool. She's like, if it sucks, it's 3 months of your life. Like, what's the worst thing that happens? I was like, okay, good point, valid point. You can do anything for 3 months, suck it up. And it turned out that I ended up doing it for a couple summers over the course of those 2 years. Probably did 130-ish $1,000 worth of business. Um, Painted 50, 60 houses. It was like at once like super stressful, but it was also really rewarding to be able to um, kind of stand back at the end of the week and look at the transformation that you made on these people's houses and look back at the end of the summer, at the end of 2 summers and say, oh, we did that 50, 60 times. Like this was pretty cool. And we made some money doing it.
So that was an internship that you got paid for?
Yeah. So that was through an
Okay.
outfit called College Works Painting.
Hmm.
And there's a couple of them, College Pro, Student Painters, all kind of similar outfits where they, at least in my case, assign you a territory, assign you a zip code, and
Yeah.
say, all right, go to town, go start knocking on doors, which I think was a really good experience for me too. I was like, I remember like psyching myself out in the truck, like in this cold March, evening, early evening, like, all right, what's my pitch going to be? All right,
Yeah.
and then remember ringing that first doorbell, and I think thankfully nobody was home. It's like, okay, that wasn't so bad. And then, you know, I would run in between the houses to, as a measure of efficiency, like I can cover more ground. And then I also thought um, it would look more excited than like somebody trudging up the driveway with a clipboard. But
Absolutely.
that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So did they like give you a script that you should pitch to these people? Did they give you any kind of like training for the job, or was it like you had to pick up the entire learning curve of it?
There was a lot of sales training, and the emphasis really was like, hey, this is kind of a sales role because you're going to hire people to help do the production, to do the painting. And I ended up uh, underbidding a lot of jobs because I was afraid of not getting work. So I ended up doing a lot of painting myself, which was not, how the program was necessarily designed. So that, I will own up to those shortcomings. But yeah, they do some paint training, lots of sales training. Kind of here's the template estimate sheet that you're going to want to use, so um, you know how much to quote a job for. And so all that stuff was really helpful.
I understand. And so then did you like contract like 1099 like some employees to like help you then paint the actual homes, or was that a lot of stuff that you took on as well?
Yeah, and so that was the other benefit of doing it through this organization, whereas like they had the kind of hiring and onboarding forms, whereas like yeah, bringing on hourly employees, and they were employees of the parent company rather than employees of you know Nick's rent and paint services.
Hmm.
So they kind of had a lot of that stuff in place already.
Did this relate to what you were doing in college at all?
At the time, it didn't,
Mhm.
but I will say that going through business school after that was so much better because I had something concrete to apply these lectures to, like going to these sales and marketing classes by day. And
Sure.
I think without that, it would have been really tell like, okay, this sounds great in theory. This sounds great for some like, multinational brand, but how do I apply this on the ground? And I think it was really helpful to have something concrete to work towards.
That's really interesting because Josh is a finance major and he almost has like a worse experience in college because he has like a successful business, because he sees how little applies to actual real world, which I guess it depends kind of where you go in your program and stuff. But I don't know, Josh, you might have something to say about it.
I think it comes down to like the commitment, right? Because I see a lot of people who are older who are like so ready to go back to school, whether it's to get a master's and then to move higher up in their own job, and then they commit to doing that school. That's really what they're focused on. But I think for like myself and like a lot of the entrepreneurs that we've had on here, kind of what they've said is that while they're trying to balance school with their side business, it can be hard because you haven't committed to anything, and therefore like you're going to school to learn how to kind of manage like a larger corporation while you're trying to figure out the small business side of things that there might not necessarily be teaching as much, and that can kind of be difficult to balance if you haven't committed. But I can 100% understand where you're getting at, Nick, by having some real world experience and then going back to school to committing to finish it kind of helps you to have a better understanding of the material that you're learning in college.
Yeah, for sure. It was no longer just purely theoretical. It became a little more applicable, which was good. I also found I was a better student the quarters that I was busiest work wise or business wise. It was something about that time management where in the quarters where I wasn't working, it was like, well, I got all the time in the world versus the, now I have to be super disciplined because I got to drive out to my territory and I got to bid all these jobs at the weekend. And I don't know. I think it made me a better student too.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100% because whenever I'm busiest, I feel like I'm most productive. And it's weird how that works because then you have days, whether it's like a snow day at school or, you know, days whenever you don't have a lot of homework to do or not a lot of tests. And it seems like you're just, you're not as productive those weeks, even though you have way more time on your hands. It's weird how that works.
Yeah.
So moving on, like from there, so you got this job painting houses, really being like more of like a salesman to try to get these bids for painting houses. Where did it take you from then? You went back to school and you finished up your college degree then.
Yeah, so that was kind of like a spring and summer gig. Was still doing school. I kind of had in the back of my mind, like it's partially because of this painting internship. And there was the company kind of posted on their internal blog at the end of the summer, like, if you're reading this, we probably ruined your life. And I was like, well, that's a click worthy title. Let's see what's going on in here. And they went on to explain, like, if you made it this far, you're probably not going to be able to work for anybody else in a normal capacity again. And that really kind of stuck with me. It's like, you know what, you're probably right. And so I always had in my mind, like, I want to be doing my own thing. At the time of graduation, I just didn't know what that thing was going to be. And so I did what you're supposed to do, got a corporate job. They moved me across the country. This was with Ford. So I was coming in like, this huge, 100-year-old corporation at the bottom rung. It was kind of still like a sales and marketing type of role, interfacing with their dealerships, like on the service and parts side of their business. Car business is awesome, fascinating business. Talking with some of these dealers who've been in business for generations and wild and crazy stuff there. But did what you're supposed to do, got that corporate job, and was spending my nights and weekends trying to figure out, okay, what is my escape path? And for me, it was an online business this time. It was a comparison shopping site for footwear, which stemmed from another internship that I had later in college at this. It was like an old school brick and mortar shoe store in Seattle that in the early days of the internet had the wild and crazy idea that, well, what would happen if we put some of our inventory online? So of course, by the time I came on board as their little marketing intern, the online side of their business had grown by leaps and bounds. But that was my first exposure to affiliate marketing and pay-per-click advertising and e-commerce and SEO, like all that stuff. A really, really cool experience to have early on. And so that was my really original side hustle, was in this footwear comparison shopping space that it worked on an affiliate model. It, would pull in the catalogs from Zappos and Amazon and all these other stores and tell you where you could find the best price on your next pair of shoes.
Wow, and was that very successful for you then?
that was the vehicle that ultimately let me quit that job. So it was 3 years of nights and weekends trying to build that thing up. And actually, so I quit my job. I was 25 years old. I thought I was, the smartest kid in the world. Like I beat the system. I got out. Like I don't know. I naively thought like this could be my thing. Like I could just be the internet shoe sales guy. Like I don't know. It was weird. It's kind of weird to think that like realizing now like all businesses kind of have a somewhat finite lifespan, and that one, while it did last for the better part of a decade, did kind of die. Kind of a slow and painful, I don't know, not super painful because I, by that time had the Side Hustle Nation stuff to fall back on, but ran that as my full-time focus for like 5 years and then started up, a bunch of projects on the side, most of which didn't go anywhere, but a couple did. And one of those was the Side Hustle Nation blog and the Side Hustle Show podcast that when the shoe business was on the decline, that stuff was on the incline and was way more fun to work on. So that became the full-time focus and really has been for the last 6 or 7 years at this point.
Okay, so would that put you at around, completely guessing here, like 32 years old?
You're gonna have to go older, man.
Older? Wow,
Yeah,
okay.
much older.
How old are you?
38.
38. Okay, wow. So so you had started the online shoe comparison website, learned a little bit about that, and then while you were doing that, then you had started Side Hustle Nation.
Yeah. So the timeline, the shoe business kind of started in its very, very early stages, 2004, 2005, 2006. I was still in college at the beginning of that time. Side Hustle Nation started in 2013 after having quit my job and been doing the full-time thing since '08.
Okay. And how did you get started with the Side Hustle Nation?
This was the result of a little bit of soul searching and a little bit of peer pressure. So the soul searching part was the kind of the common, you know, choose your niche type of questions that I advocate for and that other people will advocate for of, well, what do people ask you for help with? Like, hey, I built this thing on the site. So that was something that people asked me about. Like, how do I start a side hustle? What do you never get tired about talking about? I found I really enjoyed like deconstructing the business model. Like, well, how does that work? Where does the money come from? What kind of margins are you aiming for? Well, how do you get your first customers? I love all that stuff and still do. And so that was something. And I had been blogging for years, personal blog at nickloper.com that nobody ever read. But I found I enjoyed that process of writing too, like creating content for the internet. That was a cool creative outlet for me. And so it's like, okay, let's dust off this old personal blog. We're going to narrow down the focus to only talk about, entrepreneurship and productivity and side hustles. And it was, pretty slow going in the early years, really, if I'm being honest, but it was something that I found I really enjoyed, especially on the podcast front, just getting to connect with people like yourself and, build these relationships with guests and with listeners. It's been a long, slow climb, but it's been a ton of fun too.
Were you doing this all kind of on your own fruition? Did you have any like buddy help you, any editors kind of thing?
It was probably 3-ish years, maybe 3.5 years deep into the show,
Yeah.
when I finally hired an editing service.
Cool.
We've talked with a few other like SEO specialists, people that run their own blog website, on this podcast, and they've really said that most of them have said 6 months is kind of what it took, with having an understanding of SEO before they could start seeing traffic on there.
Yeah.
And one of the guys said it actually could take, I think he said it took really 3 years for him before he really started to see like a lot of results on there. What was the case for you with the Side Hustle Nation?
Yeah, which is so depressing. And it is a huge point in favor of starting some sort of service-based business. So it's like, I can go out, get a customer today, ring the cash register today, versus like, you mean I'm going to toil away in my bedroom for like years and years before I see any sort of results? I've seen some exceptions to that, with people starting websites like within 12 or 18 months and making, 5, 10, 20 grand off of that on a monthly basis, which is just insane to me. I would have told you the blogging ship sailed a decade ago. Like, find something new, but people are still making it work, which is inspiring. For me, it was it was probably around that 3-year mark, where maybe 2-year mark, where I really felt like I had replaced my old day job salary, which was always kind of the benchmark in my mind. I was making around 50 grand a year from Ford. And I remember, eclipsing that kind of from the different business. The shoe business was above that and then kind of declined. Um, but then to get there with Side Hustle Nation and some of the other projects was like, okay, like this is a lot of fun. This is something I really enjoy doing. And I don't know, I remember that year kind of being a turning point and feeling pretty good about the trajectory there.
I want to ask you about that period of time during the initial start of Side Hustle Nation, because to do anything for 2 years and not really see like any results or not really see income, it takes a lot more than just being in it for the money, because you can't just look up a video on YouTube or see someone saying that you can make money doing blogging or SEO and then expect to do something every day or every week for 2 years. Like the amount of mental fortitude that would take is insane. So there had to be something more that was like driving you. And I know that you kind of hit on that, being that you enjoyed talking about it and you didn't get burned out and you liked building relationships with your guests on the podcast. But I think that part is like so important for people to hear. Probably not even just with service businesses, even though you can go out and ring a cash register and get a sale today, but like with committing and sticking to anything, it's got to be like some kind of deeper meaning for wanting to do that thing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and in fairness, there were signs of life, right? Like I was seeing traction. The chart was moving up and to the right. There was some income coming in. It just wasn't huge in those days, but it was enough to keep going in combination with enjoying the work and say like, okay, I think there's something here. And on top of that, I feel like I benefited from riding this trend in a way of like, well, more people are talking about side hustles right now. And I remember my dad early on was like, hey, the recession is over, unemployment is super low, like nobody's going to be looking for this stuff. It's like, well, I don't know, I like it, who cares? Why are you taking this big like macroeconomic view and taking a dump on my project? But it's worked out. um, I think it's a combination of you trying to find motivation in the day to day, even if the results aren't necessarily there. So I tend to try and set like process oriented goals versus results oriented goals. Um, so an example would be like, can I write 500 words a day? Can I do my 20-minute hit cardio? Can I, like, rather than my goal is to lose 15 pounds by the end of March, it's like, I guess I have control over that. Maybe it's not a great example, but like, okay, what's the process that's going to take to get there? And being more diligent about
Right.
that has been a motivating factor for sure.
It's like putting like one foot in front of the other instead of like, oh, I need to run 10 miles kind of thing. It's
Yes,
like just
absolutely.
get through the first mile and then you'll be there. Did you have a lot of like resistance or support, like whichever one, from like parents, friends, girlfriend? You said you had a relationship. Um, how did that kind of work, starting out and then kind of where you are now? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, my girlfriend slash wife has been nothing but supportive. I remember there was a low point where I was actually like dusting off my old resume and starting to look like for jobs and stuff. She was like,
Yeah.
"Don't do that. You know what? You're going to be
Yeah.
miserable. Like you'll figure it out." That was her soundbite that I remember. You'll
Mhm.
figure it out, and I thought that was really powerful, um, and a testament to like this whole money thing is a team sport. Like if you can keep your expenses low, keep your lifestyle relatively in check, then uh, you can afford to weather some downturns. And I was
Yeah.
joking about my dad before too. Like he's been super supportive throughout all these crazy ventures as well. His dad was an entrepreneur and built his, I think it was like a general contracting type of business. He always joked that it skipped a generation because he spent his whole working career kind of at one or two companies. But he's been very supportive too.
Cool. Awesome.
And Nick, were you making money from advertising whenever you started to make money initially off of Side Hustle Nation, or were you making it off of like affiliate?
Yeah, it was a combination of different stuff. So affiliates from day one, Amazon, some of the typical stuff. The first thing that I sold was actually a private mastermind. through a conversation with a friend and actually a guest on the show, was like, you got some people paying attention to you. They'd probably pay to hang out with you. I was like, really? You think so? And he's like, yeah, for sure. So I put that up for sale. It was like $100 a month, 3-month mastermind with yours truly. And I probably had an email list of 700 ish at the time and got 7 or 8 applications and actually ran that for a couple years. It was when you had a group that was really firing and really, um, diligent about doing what they said they were going to do, like that was a lot of fun. After my son was born, the hour in the evening became a little bit harder to part with, and other revenue streams had kind of popped up to replace it. So ended up dropping those. But that was the first like meaningful income. It was like I got six or I forget how many members were in that first group, but 6 or 7 members. I was like, oh, $600 or $700, for a month, and like that was a pretty good income stream at the time. In the early days of the site, there was a bigger focus on me being the guinea pig experimenter. Like I'm gonna go test out these different side hustles and report back on the results, tell you what worked, what didn't work. So in the early days, there was a lot of me, freelancing, trying to sell digital products on different platforms. Like here's my results from self-publishing, or I threw this course up on Udemy, all that stuff to try and see what would happen, and share that. And those types of case study posts ended up doing pretty well. And I think, maybe helped separate the blog from some of the other stuff that was out there at the time.
Okay, and then so at that point, then once you transitioned out of the mastermind, then did you transition over into more into like advertising through the site then?
Yeah, today the monetization model is kind of like I picture it as like a three-legged stool. The first is sponsorships on the podcast become um, a meaningful revenue stream. There's affiliate offers through the site and through the email list, which has been something that I've kind of learned more about, and specifically playing the SEO world. It was weird to me that the blog audience, like there's almost two different audiences, like the blog audience and the podcast audience. Not a lot of overlap there, which kind of surprised me. I thought they were one and the same. The blog traffic is very transactional in a way. Like they find the site by Googling, ways to make extra money or something. And it's like, it's very like, okay, in and out. Like I got my answer and now I'm off to the next thing. And the podcast audience, I think, is the more entrepreneurial sided piece of the pie, where they're, in it for the long haul, and they understand like, yeah, this is hard, it takes a lot of work, but they're in it. And those are the people that I really love to talk to, but trying to serve both audiences and meet them where they're at. So that's okay. That's two legs of the stool. Third leg, historically, was like my own side hustle experiments, whether that was the freelancing or the eBay flipping or the self-publishing and stuff. Um, in an ideal world, the third leg of the stool would be my own like digital products. Have had or services like the mastermind would fall under that bucket. But I don't know. I've had some fits and starts related to selling my own like courses and stuff. So I'm seeing some positive results on a newly pre-sold course that I actually just invited a bunch of people to last week. So we'll see. We'll see where that goes. Hopefully, that can become an evergreen income stream too.
How much time does this take through your day, through your week? Maybe back when you can talk about like back when you started, how much time you dedicated to it, and then how do you balance having literally a family and still doing what you want to do?
The biggest challenge was at the beginning of COVID, when everything was like closed and locked down. Like I was used to working from home, been doing this for 10 or 12 years, but wasn't used to doing it with so much company. So we have a couple kids; they're 5 and almost 3, and so that and we were shipping them off to preschool, 4 days a week
Mhm.
prior to this, which we didn't really even think twice about it. But now so I'm down to 2 days a week, at least of dedicated time. So Tuesdays and Thursdays are Nick's work time. The kids are back at preschool a couple of days a week, which I feel like is a good balance for them and for us. Like they look forward to it. It's like Christmas morning every time they are excited to go and see everybody, and that's just like the pressure release valve that my wife and I
Sure.
need to like, okay, have a little bit of time to ourselves to focus. So that's been good. So I guess technically still kind of like a part-time project, even though like it does occupy a lot of mental space. When it first started, like running the shoe business was my main focus, and that took up the lion's share of my time. And so this was, just a little part-time thing. Fire up the podcast. Is this thing on? Anybody listening? And but it quickly became. I mean, maybe it was 15, 20 hours a week early on, and then it kind of became as a labor of love, 30, 40 for several years.
Cool.
So how did you grow the podcast show? I'm sure the blog, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure that that had a lot to do with just SEO tactics and and the way that blogs normally rank on Google. But how did you grow the podcast itself? Were you doing any kind of like marketing online? Were you asking a lot of people to share it, or friends and family? Um, were you doing any kind of advertising efforts for that?
Haven't done any paid ads for the podcast specifically. So when I launched, I had an email list of 11 people. Like that was my audience. So I was like, all right, entirely friends and family. It's like that wasn't going to cut it. But what I did have, and what you and probably everybody else who's launching a podcast has, was a like Gmail contact history or a LinkedIn connection history, a Facebook connection audience, so to speak, of people who at least somewhat probably care what you're up to, what are you working on. And so that for me was through Gmail. I would open up a new compose window and just start typing letters. Like I just went through the alphabet, like A, and see like what would pop up in the, auto suggest. And I was like, oh, Aaron, I haven't emailed Aaron in a while. Hey, Aaron, what's going on, buddy? Um, and my pitch at that time, and I would do it a little bit differently, but my pitch at that time was so like self-deprecating. It was like, I launched this new thing. I'm trying to get a little bit of exposure in iTunes. Every download counts. Here's the link. You don't even have to listen to it, but every download helps me. What I would probably do today uh, would just lead, hey, Aaron, it's been a minute. What are you up to? What are you working on? What are you excited about? Crazy year, you know, what's going on? Because it's human nature for him to respond with some reciprocity. Here's what I'm working on. What about you? Right. And then that's kind of opens the door to be like, I'm working on this thing. It's a new podcast. It's about, ways to make extra money in your spare time. If you're interested, would love for you to check it out. Let me know what you think. Or if you know anybody else who would, be sure to share it with them, or just keep me in mind, right? Like it's just kind of trying to occupy a little bit of brain space in the people in your network's head, that like, this is what you do now, or that this is something that you do, some facet of your personality. I think that's a really powerful place to be. I mean, same thing with mobile detailing, like, right? Why are people going to Google and looking for mobile detailing near me? Because they don't have a guy. They don't have somebody to call. And it's like, if you can be that person and like, hey, I know somebody, and then you get that referral. So that was the marketing of the podcast in the early days. I think another thing that helped me early on was kind of putting on that marketing hat as it relates to the episode titles. So one of the early episodes was like how one guy made enough money on Fiverr to buy a house in his first year or something. And at that time, Fiverr was still very much like the $5 marketplace. So I was like, dude, what could you possibly be selling for $5 that would let you like earn that kind of money? And he's like, Nick, it's all about the upsell. I was like, okay, go on. But being conscious of the barrier to entry to getting in somebody's earbuds. Like it's not as easy as reading a blog post. There's a little bit of a hurdle somebody's got to go to get this audio onto their device, listen to it. So the title has got to be, curiosity inducing. It's got to be compelling enough to get somebody on board. So I think those two things early on helped put the show on the map.
So were you getting any kind of like organic reach from YouTube then for like those like small clip it titles, or just uploading the podcast all together on YouTube?
I have had a back and forth on the YouTube stuff. I do like the clip strategy. I've seen kind of some surprising success because I was recording audio only, kind of, and still am, kind of some surprising success in just posting like a placeholder image and like roll the tape from the podcast. And some of these videos, quote videos, have like tens of thousands of views. I think the most popular one is over 100,000 views, and it's just tapping into a much better search engine than is Apple Podcasts, or than he's even Spotify. So for me in the early days, it was Apple Podcasts. Like, how do you give this algorithm a nudge such that it starts to spin in your favor? And I think it did start to work, but YouTube has been a good discovery channel as well as just traditional SEO. So I'll reference the show in a bunch of different posts that rank in Google just to show like, hey, there's some multimedia content in here, which I think probably gives me an advantage over a show that's just straight, audio only relying on Apple, Spotify, stuff like that.
I love the fact that you had said like, first off, I love the fact that you had been like reaching out to these like friends and family of yours, because like I've noticed there's a lot of people and it's just such a traditional like viewpoint that like I don't want to sell to friends and family. And I've been listening to some people recently that take the alternative approach that if you're selling a product or a service that you wouldn't sell to your friends and family, why are you selling it at all?
Right.
Because you should be so passionate about it and so sold on your own product that your friends and your family are the first people that you need to make sure that they have the product, right?
Yeah.
So I love that part about it. And another thing I always tell people is that people won't buy from you until they know you. So like starting with people that already know you in some sense, I think is so important, because for my mobile detailing business, I've had people that it took 10, 20, maybe even some people that have taken like 50 times to see me, see our Facebook post, see our Google post, see our Google ads, see us on Facebook advertising, hear about it from friends. And then they finally, after so many follow-ups, they're like, you know what? I think that I'm going to get my car detailed by them.
Yeah. It's like, how many touch points does it take? I like that.
It's yeah. And what is your thoughts then on actually selling or launching a business to like your warm market, to your friends and family then?
It's been really common over the 400 something interviews on the Side Hustle show that's where it starts, or at least that's where you kind of get the initial ball rolling. And I totally get like not wanting to sell to your audience. I remember even in kind of the early, I mean, gosh, those first episodes that I was promoting, like they're not good. Like, and now it's such a vulnerable like place to be at. Like, hey, go listen to my thing. Like, I don't know. It was a little bit rough. Like now, okay, of course, tune in, but you got to get your reps in. Um, trying to think of what else on the marketing front. Oh, yes, going back to the network thing. What's more powerful, because your product might not be your network might not be in the target audience for what you're trying to sell. And so you're not necessarily trying to sell directly to them, but you're trying to occupy that mind share, and you're really trying to tap in to your network's network. It's like, well, who do you know? And if you kind of think of like, well, you might know 200 people, but each of them might know 200 people. And yeah, there's going to be some overlap, but you see how those circles kind of expand really exponentially, really fast. And that's where it becomes really powerful to be known as, oh, I'm, your local mobile detailing guy. I do web design. I do pet waste removal. I do what, if you want to learn to start a side hustle, you got to pay attention to this guy. And I think occupying that space, I've had the like blog posts. I want strangers on the internet to find them, but I don't want to share it with my friends and family. Like I've totally been in that same boat. It's kind of weird, but you almost have to, uh, spread the word to get the ball rolling a little bit.
Yeah,
I
that's such
think
a
it
weird spot to be at too. Go ahead, Brian.
I think it works for your like building your personality too, and really making sure that you do believe in what you're selling and what you're speaking about too. Because if you're like, oh, I don't want my friends at school or friends at college to hear about it, it's like, well, you're kind of ashamed of what you're doing, low key. It's like you kind of got to just own it and be about it, I think.
Yeah, the projects that I've started, especially because online, it's like easier to be anonymous, so to speak,
Hmm.
or to try and create these faceless websites and brands. Like the ones that I've tried to do like that just never took off because it was I don't know, there was no personality there. It just because then you couldn't tap it, you didn't feel like you could share it because it was like, well, it's not like who's running this. Like I always check the about page, like I want to see pictures, I want to see who am I dealing with, who's talking to me here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so important. I've tried to do the same thing, like starting websites or businesses without a face, like trying to disconnect myself from it. But the reality is the person behind the brand is the brand itself. Like you have to be selling, you're servicing the customers, and they go hand in hand together. So like if you're not, it almost seems like if you're not committed to it enough to let people know that you are this brand in a way, especially whenever you're first
Yeah.
starting something, that you
Mhm.
probably shouldn't be, you need to rethink or reconsider what like exactly you're selling or what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it. I know you've got some experience in the FBA world where it's similar. Like it, and for the most part, Amazon customers don't care. Like they don't care about the backstory of like, well, I was in my grandma's kitchen and these her cooking utensils were so good and they were made in Italy and blah blah. Like okay, like if you're selling on your own site through Shopify, like okay, that story matters a little bit more. But on Amazon, you can be a little bit more anonymous. I get your point, and I think that's a whole totally true about like you know commit to it, commit to being the face of it, and you can extract yourself from it, from the operations of it over time, but especially early on, like it's kind of the guerrilla warfare, like the one-on-one communication that really convinces people that it's worth paying attention to.
Yep, absolutely. So I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on school, and I don't think that there's any better way to do it, to ask you that about that than to ask you what you are going to tell your kids now that you are a dad whenever it comes to going to college or pursuing some kind of entrepreneurial journey. So what are you going to tell your kids whenever they come time to go, either to make the decision to go to college, or to start something on their own or go to work? What's your thought process, and how are you going to plan to speak to them about that?
That is an interesting one because my wife and I both have college degrees. She's got a master's degree, and from my camp, I keep just waiting for the day where like the line in the sand is drawn, the announcement is made. Okay, guys, it's safe. College is obsolete. You don't have to do this anymore. Just save your 200 grand.
Yeah.
Do not pass go. Um, but every year it becomes more and more. I don't know, maybe not more and more relevant, but I absolutely for certain trades, very much recommended. Like, so she's in engineering, and it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, you're going to go into engineering, you're going to need a degree. Same thing. Like, if you're going to go into accounting, if you're going to go into law, you're going to go into medicine. I think it absolutely makes sense. If you are going to study business, like I did, unless you want to get an MBA and go down that route, maybe. But if you're going to study liberal arts, like oh, that makes me so nervous, especially if you're going to do it at a fancy private school. I see people coming out of school with so much debt, and they have a philosophy degree or something, and it's like, okay, but I don't know. It makes me really nervous. I saw a graphic the other day, and it was like, the cost of streaming services, and it had like, Netflix is $12 a month, Disney Plus is like $8 a month, Hulu is $8 a month, and then it was like Harvard, it's like 50 grand, and it's like, oh my god, and it's just especially if school continues to be remote and virtual, like how long do these institutions stick around in the format that we know them?
Yeah.
Um, what we're doing from a practical standpoint is we are saving for their college, but kind of like in a toe dip amount. We're not putting all the chips in that tax advantaged college savings account, but we're trying to fund it a little bit, just in case college is not obsolete, and that is a path for them. Um, I don't know. It's risky because it's like I don't feel like I'm necessarily using my degree, but at the same time, it was some of the experiences that I had in
Sure.
college through these different internships that really kind of set me down this path.
Mhm.
Sure. So
Yeah.
if your kid came to you and they said, "Dad, I don't want to go to college. I would rather start up my own business." What would you tell them?
I would love to imagine I'd be very supportive of that. I'd have to get mom's approval for that.
Yeah.
Say like, okay, what's the plan here? Um, and I'm kind of surprised that that's my reaction because it's like I guess I value education maybe more than I thought. Um, but no, I would be encouraging of that and do everything I could to try and help make that a success while still letting them learn the bumps and bruises along the way.
Yeah.
I almost was hoping that my parents may approach it very similarly. And there's not a whole lot of parents out there that save for their kids' college and then say, "Hey, if you don't want to go to college, you could use this money that we've saved up, this 25, 50, $100,000 to start your own business." Like that is something that is no one says, almost no one says, at least from parents that I know. if the kid says that, the parents view it as like a waste of money. And I
Yeah.
understand the thought process behind it because you're not investing back really into yourself directly. It's more like an indirect experience. But it's just interesting to see that is not something that is thought of by most parents. Is like, well, while we can fund the college, we could also use it as a opportunity for you to start your own thing.
Yeah, it's a different kind of seed capital. I mean, that's the point of college anyways. It's like seed capital for your career, or, theoretically should be. So that is a really interesting one. Did you guys, I mean, Tim Ferriss has talked about this where he's like debating going back to getting his MBA. And instead of dumping 100 grand into that, he dumped it into, investing in startups, expecting to, take some lumps along the way,
Hmm.
but ended up being, what he called kind of a, grassroots education in what it takes to grow a business versus sitting in a classroom and learning that way. I like that seed capital. Like, here you go, here's one pot of money for school, here's another pot of money to get something off the ground.
Yep, absolutely. I know exactly what you're talking about, Tim Ferriss. I loved that he said that. That was in his Tools of Titans book, and I'm sure that he's made videos about that as well. So I like that point a lot.
Although I would encourage, so rather than, and that's the crazy thing, right? It's like you saved up 50, 100, 200 grand for a college education. It doesn't take anywhere near that amount of money to get a business off the ground. Like, most of the
Mm,
stuff I've started has been for like less than $500.
yeah.
And it is kind of crazy when you compare the two side by side.
And that gives you such an advantage in building, having that capital already built to just buy the things that you need and not really worry about, if the first couple of years or a couple months are not really, super profitable.
Yeah.
It's not
Rather
that big
than
of a deal.
entering your adult life with, just straddled with this crazy debt, which,
Hmm.
which kind of limits your options down the road. I don't know.
Yeah.
I really feel for people graduating today. But like I said, I'm old. So
So if there's any one piece of advice that you could give to students starting, whether they're an entrepreneurial student or a business student, and aren't too sure about like this whole corporate thing, they're not too sure about working at a company for 40 years and retiring with their 401k, what advice would you give to that kind of person?
I love it. And I love that you guys are thinking about this stuff at such an early age. A couple things that were helpful to me was to keep expenses low, right? In Rich Dad Poor Dad, they talk about, you know, investing in cash flow and, working your way to like the business owner type of stuff. But the other side of that is like when income from assets you control, maybe that's a business, maybe that's investments, exceeds your monthly expenses, you're free. Like, you have escaped the rat race. You've won the game. Like, that's an awesome place to be. But the place where people kind of, and I myself was in a rush to like, I want to be a grown up, I want to get my own place. And like, so my expenses kind of shot up to live up to my means. And I was like, I didn't need to do that. I probably would have had more fun, having roommates and hanging out, like living like we did in college. So, mind the expense side. Just because you have a, quote, grown up job doesn't necessarily mean you need to start, uh, you know, buying cars and buying houses and all that stuff. Live like a student as long as you can. The other thing is this experimenters side. So, I mean, same thing. Like, hey, what was the risk in starting the mobile detailing business? Like, worst case, we're out maybe $500 and our pride. Like,
Yep, that's
it
it.
there's very low downside
Mhm.
to this stuff, and there's uh, a friend of mine, and actually an even older guy than me, called Todd Tressiter, runs a site called financialmentor.com. And he talked about kind of like the law of wealth building. And he's like, you want to give yourself, take enough chances, but make sure they're low risk chances with a big enough upside that like it almost becomes inevitable that you find something that hits, erases all the losses, and then can, put you off in a pretty good wealth building position for the rest of your days. And I feel really fortunate to have done that. Like I said, you know, nothing that I started cost more than I think the painting business was probably the most expensive one because I went and bought a $3,000 pickup truck. And other than that, everything else has been really affordable to get off the ground. Um, but like, kind of taking these low risk experiments, low risk bets, with a disproportionate upside potential, and you just kind of keep taking swings until you find something that hits. And that's definitely been the path that's worked for me.
Yeah, I love that. I love the service idea too. I think that starting like a service-based business with low entry barrier to entry, the only thing that you're really committing is maybe a few $100s in startup cost, and then just your time besides that. And when you've got something that you're passionate about that you enjoy doing as like a service, something that whether you could start it doing at nights or on the weekends or just on your days off, um, I think that that's one of the best ways to start, because I started with Amazon. FBA was one of the first businesses that I did, and that was it was a pretty steep loss from that. And to be able to recoup that money and then redo like a product based business, I think would have been pretty difficult. So I really do think that the best business anyone can start is something, whether it's through like reselling stuff like Brian does, selling sneakers, selling clothing and stuff like that, stuff that it's just a few $100s in startup costs that you're out,
Yeah.
or something like a service-based business. I think that those are like the best things to start to really figure out if this whole business side of things and the entrepreneurial life is something that you want to pursue, and also figure out what you want to do.
Yeah. Agree 100%.
Great. Well, Nick, where can people find you if they want to learn more from about what you're doing and about the Side Hustle Nation?
You bet. Of course, would love to have you tune into the Side Hustle Show in your favorite podcast app. If you hit up sidehustlenation.com/ideas, that is my kind of constantly updated laundry list of different part-time ways to make some extra money. My hope is, by the time you scroll down to the bottom of that post, you got 8 or 10 different browser tabs open. Like, I want to learn more about that. Oh, that sounds interesting. I'll check that out. And you'll see lots of different options on there with no opt-in required.
Awesome. Well, thanks again so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this show with us. It was amazing. I really like talking to you.
You bet, guys. Tons of fun.
All right.